the paper.
Yeah, I prefer to think.
Okay.
I prefer to listen from me.
Okay. No problem. So you did this last time, right? Last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
Every Saturday.
So maybe while we're waiting for the other people to come, I'd like to ask you, how many of you have any knowledge about Chinese Muslims? Any?
Islam in mainland China.
Yes. No, not at all. Okay, so how long do you think have Muslims been in China? Or has Islam reached in China? How long ago do you think? Any idea? Any idea at all? How many years? While we're waiting for the other students. Would you have any idea? Yes?
Since the time of Rasulullah.
Well, the records are not that early, but you are very near. Yes. That means, yes. Yes. Actually, the Silk Road preceded the Islam. So there has been contact between Middle East and China even before that. Yes. So in some ways, yeah, it is that early. Yeah. Would you have any idea? How long has Islam been in China? Okay. So at least now for this session, the students are a bit nearer to the mark. Last time we held this session, most of them said a few hundred years, at the most and so on. But actually, according to the record, at least the written record, there is, documentation from the Tang Dynasty. Okay, so maybe we'll start in just 1 minute. Let me see if there's some other students. So I think we're starting with, but we start. Okay? Now, just to illustrate how difficult it is for Islam, for the Muslims to be in China, I would just like to draw your attention to a very fundamental word that everybody uses in China. Does everybody know what this means? Anybody from the Chinese? Yes. This is the character ka, yeah. I think in Mandarin you call it cha, and then it means family, which is the basic unit of society, right? I mean, as an overseas Chinese Muslim, I never realized how significant this character was until an anthropologist talking about, ethnic Muslims and so on, drew us to this characteristic. Everybody, the Chinese can tell me these are radicals, right? All Chinese characters have radicals. That means components. It's a pictograph. It's a picture of something in long ago. And Chinese language is the only surviving pictographic language. The other pictographic languages would be, do you know any examples? Yes, the hieroglyphs in Egypt, and Mesopotamia, and Sumeria, and so on. So these are all pictographs. Now what is this radical? Radicals are the components. So this would be, what does it mean? This one, this radical? Any idea? Yes, it's a roof. Now, what is this radical? You have any idea? You see, even the Chinese don't realize this one because it just go, you just consider it like for taken for granted, right? Then this anthropologist, Dr. Paul O'Connor, in his thesis about Pakistanis here in Hong Kong and ethnic minorities in Hong Kong, drew this interesting fact. He said this is the character for the pig. This is the radical for the pig. So in effect, the diet of the Chinese, in terms of the diet and in terms of the culture, because of course food, is connected with culture and everything, the pig is a very important component because it was like a symbol for survival. That if you had food, this is like a character for the food, then you would be like safe. You have a family, you've got food in the house, you are comfortably surviving. So he said actually you would notice how difficult it is for Islam to take root in China and how difficult it is for the Muslims, to survive in China, even just on the basis of this character alone. Because it's a character of the basic unit of society, the family. And that is, this is the roof with a pig in it, we're happy, we're surviving, So that is something that, for me, as an overseas Chinese, I didn't realize the significance of it until an anthropologist drew us to the fact. And even, for example, for the Chinese here, it didn't really sink into you, right, until today, right? The significance of some kind of, dietary characteristic of different cultures. So that, I think I will start with this character to emphasize to you that in fact, in terms of Islam in China, it was not an easy thing for the Muslims to, to survive there. And for them to have survived for thousands of, for 1,400 years, that is really an achievement. Okay? Now, my title for here is Muslims in China or China's Muslims. Now, the reason why I made this title is particularly because Chinese Muslims did have a period of development in China. And they are basically, could be divided into 4 periods. Okay? So my topic would be, first of all, I'll talk about the demographic data on China, because for all the other people who are not familiar in China, then a little overview about the land and so on would be very good. Demographic data on the Muslim population in China, historical background, how the Muslims came to China, the 4 periods, and the unique characteristic. Now, before I go on to the next one, I'd like to, next slide, I'd like to ask everybody, is there anything unique about China's Muslims that you can think about? Anything you've seen on the internet, anything that you've come across in books and so on? Is there anything particular that you might think is, strange?
There was some minority group in China that they are born Muslim.
Yes. Okay. So that is very good. Now we'll go into the next slides and I'll show you what are the particularly unique characteristics that can only be found among Chinese Muslims. Yeah. Okay. Now, for a brief demographic data, to understand the culture of China, you'd have to go into the characters, the pictographs. Now, this one, 中国. Now, I can't remember the elaborate writing of it. The simplified writing would mean that this is the middle of the world, but the country in the middle. So it's a center. They really considered themselves as center of civilization even during ancient times. Okay, it's situated in East China, west of the Pacific Ocean. The coastline is quite wide. It is the world's 3rd largest country, okay, in terms of land size, about 9.6 million square kilometers. Now, the Chinese government at present is divided into, in regions. And they divide into 22 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, 4 municipalities, and 2 SARs, Special Administrative Region. So it's not only Hong Kong, but it's also Macau. And of course, everybody knows the one disputed territory, which until now has not been settled, that is Taiwan. Okay? Now, the Chinese consider themselves to be part of the Han people, that means from the Han onwards, they consider that as a glorious time, so they consider themselves from that time to be sons of Han. And the small ethnic minority groups have, by and large, been absorbed into the Chinese culture. For example, does anybody know now of a Manchurian who has, a separate culture? Manchu Guo before? The Manchurians? They have by and large disappeared, right? The last dynasty, the Qing dynasty. And also in terms of the Mongolians, while they still do exist in China, the culture and, it's not very distinct anymore, right? So at more than 1.3 billion is the world's largest population. And it is still, population growth is a big problem in China. Now, in terms of the groupings in China, we have 55 ethnic minority groups. Of course, the 56 would be the Han, which is the majority. And of this ethnic minority grouping, 10 of them would be ethnic minority Muslims. Okay? Now, the definition I would like to put out here is that it's a group of people who speak a common language, occupy a common area, and share a common sense of social values. They comprise only 10% of the population, but you would be surprised, they actually have the land mass bigger, 60% of the land. And it is strategically located in areas where there are very vast natural resources. And this, I think, is unique in China and actually in the Muslim lands as well. The subhanallah, those areas who have a lot of natural resources and the one that everybody's fighting for, majority of them is located in Muslim lands. Okay? It is like a gift to the Muslims. Okay? Now, Xinjiang would be probably very popular in the news, right? Everybody knows of the problem in Xinjiang. Now, it borders Soviet Union, Mongolia, Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan. And it has one of the largest reserves of oil. Yes. In Yunnan, the southwest, borders Burma, Laos, and Vietnam, and has some of China's largest timber reserves. Okay, so these are very important areas in China. Okay? Now there are 5 autonomous regions based on the location of 5 of the larger and more important minority nationalities. That's the Zhuang, Hui, which is actually, sometimes they call it the Han Muslims. Yeah. The Uyghurs, Uyghur is a Turkic group. The Tibetans, that is non-Muslim, and the Mongolians. Okay? Now these are the 5 autonomous regions in China. Now I just want to show you the map of China, particularly because you will be looking at it later on to see where the Muslims in China are. Now these colors would be in terms of what kind of municipality it is. For example, this one, Hong Kong and Macau, would be the green one, SARs. The ones who are disputed with India is here, that's violet. And the one that's disputed with Taiwan is here, the one in blue. The rest would be provinces, the one in pink. The one in yellow would be autonomous region. And you can see, Xinjiang is a very big part. Okay, these are just the names. Just for your information, I put them in the slide there. You can have a look at later. And these are the 10 distinct minority groups that are considered a part of the Muslims. So they are, most of them will be of Turkic origin, except for the Han Hui here. And I think there was one that was from Indo-European, but I can't remember which one it is. So totally, in 1990, I'm sorry I could not get the latest census. I've been trying to locate what is the updated data. This one is still 17 million, or less than 20 million. The population estimate of how many Muslims there are in China varies from 20 million to 200 million, particularly because there is actually no good way of getting the data. The census does not ask you what your religion is in China. So in terms of how they come out with this one, is most probably on the location itself. Okay, and actually does not also consider those that have become Muslims, the Han majority, and also the Hui minority that has lost Islam in effect. Some of them, a lot of them, have forgotten their religion. Okay, now these are the regions with large number of Muslims. You can see it later on now. If you can see, it's only 2% of the population now for Yunnan, but historically there was a lot of Muslims there. A lot of things happened over the last dynasty, including the Cultural Revolution, that forced migration and decimation of large portions of the population in the whole of China. But particularly, it was devastating for Yunnan. So if you can see, even everybody there except for Ningxia, Hui Autonomous Region, is still a very big majority there. Gansu is only 8% now. Xinjiang is over 50%. Yunnan 2%, and every major city in China would have a sizable population of Hui Muslims. This is now the data according to the percent of China's Hui Muslim population, because that is the majority in China at present. That is spread throughout the whole region. They would be concentrated in Gansu, but then they would have also other percentages overall. Now these are the mosques, the most famous mosques in China. The record now is about more than 37,000, but if you can see here, historically, all the mosques, the very beautiful mosques are everywhere. Okay. Now, in terms of the history of Islam in China, there is a very famous hadith. I think most Muslims would know it, that seek knowledge even unto China. Now, there is some slight disputes according to the scholars whether this hadith is actually authentic. However, in terms of our purpose of your discussion, what is essential for this is that it is a mark of the importance of learning among the Muslims. Okay, so that even as far as how far it went, they must learn. And in fact, the most authentic hadith we have is that learning is from the cradle to the grave. Okay. Now, in terms of the actual historical record, the third Caliph, Uthman ibn Affan anhu, had the deputation to China led by Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, the Prophet's maternal uncle, 18 years after his death at 650 CE, which is actually AD, but in terms of our discussion, we normally call it the Common Era. Now, this is included in the ancient record of the Tang Dynasty. And the first mosque that is recorded is actually in Canfu, which is now known as Guangzhou, or among the Westerners they would call it Canton. So that is very, very old mosque. Now this is just a timeline. I'm just showing you a timeline of the Chinese dynasties so you can see it in terms of the Islamic history later on. So everybody, if you are not familiar with the more than 4,000, in fact I think so, around 5,000 years of Chinese history, these are the major dynasties. And for our purposes, actually, as far as what I saw in one of the books, Chinese delegations did reach Middle East, even during the Han Dynasty. Although I wasn't able to get the record of that. That was before the Prophet's time. Okay. Now, for our purposes, Islam in China started during this period, Tang Dynasty. Now, this dynasty, this would be significant as well, the Yuan Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, and the Qing Dynasty. Those dynasties would be very, very significant in terms of Islamic history, Muslims in China history. Now, this is a very brief timeline of the history of Islam. I'm just putting it for your benefit so that you can see, for example, when is the arrival of Islam to China. You can see there is a record here, Islam introduced to China. And there will be records later on in terms of this one, Islam on the rise in China. And I think, yes, this one, suppression of the Muslims in China. So if you see that record, that would basically fall under the Tang, the Yuan, and the Ming, and the Qing dynasty. And these are the rest of the timeline for Islam, history of Islam. Okay, now, two ways that the Muslims reached China were through the Silk Road and also something they call the Pepper Road. Essentially, it was just the land route and the sea route. So this is, I think, the old map and how they used to call the countries before. If you can juxtapose it now, you can see these are the religious sites that are important, and also the Silk Road. In fact, the Silk Road was very beneficial in terms of not only transporting goods and people, but also ideas. So religion actually benefited very much from whether the Silk Road was navigable or not. These are the present day countries now. You can see the names before have changed. There's a lot more countries divided now. But it's still, the same red line you can see over there. Now, this is a drawing by a Chinese Muslim of how Islam came to China. It's just the same thing, but I just wanted to show you that even the Muslims themselves, they were very aware in China, and they would also do their own drawings, and they would include, I think this one here would include the 4 major important mosques in China. One of them I will show you later, this one, in Shenzhou. Now, that first period we're going to talk about now is Islamic Empire to the Middle Kingdom. They didn't call them Hui Muslims before. They called them Dashi or Hei Yi Dashi, the black robed gentlemen. Now, Arab traders during the time of the Prophet brought Islam to China along the Silk Road, the land and the sea route. And there was also very important development is that one of the emperors during that time requested for assistance to help quell a rebellion. So this one actually sort of gave the Muslims a role that until now they play. Over the history of China, Muslims have served as soldiers, as military depositions to different areas in China. And that is also one of the reasons why they are spread throughout the whole territory. Okay? It started during this time and then continued throughout the history. And that is why until now, I'm not sure if it is correct, but there was a book that said, and I will ask, we have a Hui Muslim here with us. I invited her to come for discussions, so that if you had any personal questions for her on the Muslims in China, she could answer it as a first hand. Okay? Now, the Umayyad Caliphate and Abbasid Caliphate sent totally 6 delegations to China, and this is until now what the Muslims dominate in, and that is in terms of trading. The Prophet ﷺ, he engaged in trading, and until now most of the Muslims, and even during the history of China, they were dominating the import and export business, and the Director General of Shipping was consistently held by a Muslim in the Song Dynasty. This is, I just want to show you, of course China and other empires have different land dominions over dynasties. So in the Tang Dynasty, this was the dominion of China. You can see the map now, and the map of that time juxtaposed over it. And this one is I think this was the warring period, if I'm not mistaken, right? When the country was divided into different states, and the rest was, not even included in Chinese dominion. So this is one of the very, very historical Beijing Niujie Qingrensi, and it was erected during the 996 Common Era, the Song Dynasty. They have inside here the artifact of a handwritten Quran and two tombs. Now there is some problem regarding to having tombs in mosques, but that is the historical data that we have, that they have left down to us. For the Yuan dynasty, in turn, they have actually benefited from having this dynasty, and the introduction of Islam to Yunnan was led by Sayyid Din Umar, the first governor, and his son Nasruddin was a contemporary of Marco Polo. Everybody knows who Marco Polo is, right? The great Venetian explorer. Actually, in terms of Islamic history, we have Ibn Battuta, who actually preceded him by a few hundred years, and he actually went into farther areas than Marco Polo. But because of our Western-oriented historical data, we normally consider only those that they know. This is a detail of a painting depicting Yuan dynasty procession and the Mongol troops. Does everybody know that the Yuan dynasty is actually an ethnic group that occupied China? So this is very unique in that they the occupation of the Yuan dynasty to China actually brought the Muslim soldiers and the artisans into China. It decimated areas in the Middle East and the other Muslim empire areas, but actually in terms of another aspect, it increased the population of Muslims in China because they force-marched people into China to serve them. And this is the Yuan dynasty at that time. You can see the huge, difference in terms of land dominion. And the next dynasty would be, it's the Ming dynasty, and this is the golden age of Islam. And the difference now is that instead of before, when they were sort of like foreigners in China, and they actually only lived in separate areas designated by the government, during the Ming dynasty, because they actually assisted, some Muslims assisted the Ming dynasty to come into power, then now they integrated into the Chinese culture. And this is when we start the word Han Hui. That means like Muslims, but essentially of the Han culture. The status was repealed, the foreign status, and they adopted Chinese material culture. You can characterize it into full integration into Han society, but in a way, towards the later part of the Ming dynasty, when they decided to close China to the outside world, they suffered double isolation within the empire and from outside the empire. This is a detail of a Ming imperial seal with a date. Now, the significance is that it was according to the Chinese calendar, but it was in Chinese, Persian, and Mongolian. Okay? Now, this is the territory now of the Ming dynasty. You see the Chinese empire evolving in terms of land. Now, this is an example of an imperial edict to Mir Haji, and this you can see that. This is still in the Yuan dynasty. This imperial edict issued 40 years after the Mongol Yuan dynasty. Already the Ming, but still they are following the old Yuan format. They are still using the three main languages of the Yuan court: Mongolian, Persian, and Chinese. And this probably is the most popular navigator in Chinese history, right? How many of you knew that he was actually a Muslim? Yes, he is a Muslim. He was a Muslim. Yes, this is Zheng He, or they call him by his original name, Ma San Bao, and his Muslim name, I think, is Haji Mahmud Shamsuddin. That is his name. Zheng He actually is that imperial name given to him, awarded to him by the ruler. That's not his original name. He was the admiral, China's foremost adventurer. He was a Muslim and a warrior, and he helped transform China into the region and perhaps the world's superpower of his time. Now this is important because actually there is a book disputing that Christopher Columbus first discovered America. According to that book, it was actually him, although of course historically we'll never know. But anyway, that is the extent of his reach. And he led a total of 7 expeditions to the Indian Ocean. Now the next slide, just to show you how incredibly large his fleet was. This is one of his ships, only one of his ships. And this is how small Christopher Columbus' ship was. This is according to scale. So you can see how advanced China's navigation at the time was. And everybody knows, of course, that the compass was invented by the Chinese. Okay? So that one is located now in Dubai, just to show the scale and size of the Western ships at the time and the Muslim ships, which was led by even if it's China, it's still led by a Muslim. So that's why they considered putting it in Dubai. Okay, now the process of assimilation, before, when they didn't used to use Chinese for their names, now they adopted Chinese names. And for everybody who might come across people who are named Ma, Han, Ha, Hu, Sai, Sha, or Zheng, they could be, originally Chinese Muslims. Yeah, it's a possibility. In fact, there are some who are surnamed Guo and Ding, but this is in the southern parts. Okay? And then you can see that the Muslim culture, customs of dress, and food also underwent a synthesis. Now, instead of becoming Muslims in China, now they are going into becoming Chinese Muslims. The Islamic mode of dress and dietary restrictions were maintained and not compromised. That means while even if they were dressed in Chinese clothes, it still were, the veil and so on, it's still, proper. And in time, the Muslims began to speak Han dialects and to read in Chinese. Well into the Ming era, the Muslims could not be distinguished from other Chinese other than by their unique religious customs. One Chinese Muslim particularly said, when a foreigner talked to him, "You're a Muslim Chinese?" And he said, "Yes, I am here, if you see me, you can see like the mosques in China, that outwardly it looks Chinese, but inward, when you go inside, it is still an Islamic institution." Now this is where the most difficult era of the Muslims happened, and that is during the Qing dynasty. Everybody knows that the Qing dynasty is another occupying force, and in contrast to the Mongolian occupying force, the Qing dynasty employed the divide and conquer tactic in order to keep everybody, in control. They would send